For decades, every plumber, mechanic, and electrician in America has carried a blue-handled tool. They keep it on their hip, they call it a channel lock. The name is ubiquitous. It completely erased the generic name of the tool from the English language. But on an overcast Tuesday in 1932, this tool did not exist. It was a desperate sketch on a Meadville, Pennsylvania, drafting table. An engineer named Howard Manning was trying to save a failing blacksmith company from the Great Depression. 31 years later, that single sketch would force an entire corporation to legally abandon its family name. The 19th century American tradesman had a problem. Pipes were getting bigger. Municipal water lines were expanding. Steam heat systems moved into factories. Grip was everything. A standard pipe wrench was heavy. It weighed up to 5 pounds. It was bulky in tight spaces. Plumbers needed a lighter tool for medium-sized fittings. They reached for pliers. Before 1932, pliers relied on a simple slip joint design. A single pivot bolt connected two halves of drop-forged steel. The tradesman pushed the bolt through a slotted track to widen the jaw. It was a flawed design. The slip joint was an 18th century invention attempting to hold 20th century infrastructure. A plumber grips a 2-inch galvanized steel pipe. The slip joint jaws open to their maximum width. The pivot bolt slides to the absolute end of the figure 8 track. The plumber applies 100 pounds of grip force to the handles. Leverage multiplies that force at the jaw. The steel teeth bite into the round pipe. The pipe pushes back. That aggressive counterforce travels directly to the single pivot bolt. The bolt is a 1/4-inch cylinder of steel. It is trapped in shear stress. It fights to keep the two halves of the tool from tearing apart. The mechanical tolerance fails. The jaws rack sideways. The teeth slip violently off the pipe. The handles slam together. The plumber's fingers are crushed. Blood blisters form, knuckles bleed, hex nuts strip. Mechanics wrap the handles in leather to soften the blow. Plumbers hated them. The bolt makes the joint. The joint makes the tool. The tool breaks the tradesman. The slip joint plier was a complete failure of leverage. The pivot bolt was the weak link. The harder a mechanic pulled, the more likely the tool failed. The trade needed a tool that bypassed the bolt entirely. The stress had to transfer into the massive drop-forged steel body. George B. DeArmond was a blacksmith. In 1886, he lived in Evansburg, Pennsylvania. He was 36 years old. He did not forge pliers. He forged farrier tools. Horses built the 19th century American economy. Every horse required shoes. Every farrier required tools. DeArmond understood high-carbon steel. He understood heat treatment. He built a small brick forge. He founded the Champion Tool Company. He had no factory. He had an anvil and a heavy hammer. DeArmond forged hoof pares. He forged pinchers. He forged heavy hammers. A farrier's nipper had to bite cleanly through a steel horseshoe nail. The edge had to hold its precise shape. If the steel was too soft, the jaw dented. If it was too hard, the jaw shattered. Tempering was a precise visual science. DeArmond watched the color of the heated steel. Dull red indicates 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Cherry red indicates 1,400 degrees. Orange indicates 1,700 degrees. DeArmond struck the metal at exactly orange. He quenched the glowing steel in oil. Sales required travel. DeArmond did not print a catalog. He loaded a horse-drawn wagon with heavy hand-forged tools. He left Evansburg. He drove town to town across western Pennsylvania. He sold to local blacksmiths. He sold to regional hardware stores. He sold directly to farmers in Crawford and Venango counties. Dirt roads turned to deep mud in the spring. They froze solid in the winter. A round trip took weeks. He guaranteed every tool. If a nipper broke, he replaced it. He asked no questions. He made a small profit. He bought more steel. He built more tools. By 1904, Champion Tool outgrew Evansburg. DeArmond moved the operation 30 miles north. He relocated to Meadville, Pennsylvania. Meadville sat directly on the Erie Railroad line. It had cheap access to Pittsburgh steel. It had fast access to Appalachian coal. The Champion Tool Company constructed a permanent brick factory. Production scaled rapidly. DeArmond hired local men. He parked the wagon. He shipped tools by rail. The product catalog expanded. The forge produced mechanics' hammers. They produced cold chisels. They produced alignment punches. Output in 1886, a few dozen tools a week. Output in 1910, hundreds of tools a day. By 1920, Champion was a regional manufacturing power. The automobile quickly replaced the horse. Farrier tools became obsolete. The core market vanished. Champion Tool had to pivot to survive. They began forging tools for the automotive mechanic. They forged heavy wrenches. They forged basic slip-joint pliers. They utilized massive drop forging presses. A drop hammer is a gravity-fed weapon. A 2,000-pound ram drops onto a heated steel blank. The floor shakes. The noise deafens the operator. The 2,000-degree steel crushes into a precision die. Drop forging aligns the internal grain of the steel. It compacts the molecular structure. It makes the tool nearly unbreakable. Cast iron shatters under heavy force. Drop forged steel bends. Tradesmen demand drop forged steel. Champion stamped their name into the hot metal. Champion DeArmond Tool Company. It was a proud family name. It carried 4 decades of trust in Pennsylvania. George B. DeArmond died in 1928. He left the busy factory to his 2 sons. Almond DeArmond managed regional sales. J. Howard DeArmond managed factory production. The timing was disastrous. 1 year later, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Construction stopped. Factories closed. Mechanics lost their jobs. Plumbers stopped buying new tools. Tool sales collapsed across America. The hardware market flooded with cheap surplus inventory. The 1930s hardware market was heavily saturated. Dozens of American companies forged pliers. Utica Drop Forge made them. Crowder made them. Crescent Tool Company dominated the wrench market and sold pliers too. Every company made the exact same slip joint design. The tools were identical. The mechanical failures were identical. A standard 6-inch slip joint plier cost 50 cents. In today's money, that is $9. It was a pure commodity. Champion DeSarval. It was a pure commodity. Champion DeSarv commodities against a dozen larger competitors. They bled cash. The Meadville Forge went quiet. The family desperately needed a new product. They needed a tool no competitor possessed. They needed a utility patent. They employed a chief engineer. His name was Howard Manning. Manning was not a DeArmond. He was an employee on a standard salary. His job was to invent solutions to mechanical problems. Manning stared at the standard slip joint plier. He saw the weak pivot bolt. He knew the bolt had to be eliminated from the stress equation. The 2 halves of the plier had to lock together independently. The mechanical force had to transfer directly from the bolt into the massive drop-forged steel handles. He sat down and began sketching on a drafting table. Howard Manning bypassed the pivot bolt. He completely eliminated it from the stress equation. He redesigned the 2 drop-forged halves of the plier. On one half, he milled a series of parallel circular grooves into the steel face. On the opposite half, he milled a raised, perfectly matched steel tongue. The tradesman slid the halves together. The tongue slipped into a groove. The 2 halves locked solid. The pivot bolt remained, but its job changed. It no longer handled the crushing rotational force of a gripped pipe. It only served to hold the 2 halves together when the tool was open. When the jaws closed on a pipe, the steel tongue pressed into the steel groove. The mechanical load distributed evenly across solid drop-forged metal. The stress transferred from a 1/4-inch bolt into the entire massive body of the tool. The mechanic squeezed the handles. The jaws bit into the pipe. The harder he pulled, the tighter the tongue locked into the groove. The tolerance was absolute. The jaws could not rack sideways. The teeth could not slip. You could physically remove the nut, pull the bolt out of the tool entirely, and the jaws would still grip and turn a pipe. The mechanical design was flawless. Manning finalized the blueprints in early 1932. He filed the U.S. utility patent application. The patent was officially granted in 1934. The document number was 1,950,362. Manning was listed as the sole inventor. He did not own the invention. Howard Manning was a salaried employee. He signed a standard corporate assignment clause. The Champion De-Armament Tool Company acquired 100% of the patent rights. Manning received his regular weekly paycheck. He received 0 royalties. He held no equity in the company. The De-Armament family used patent 1,950,362 to build a global manufacturing empire. They leveraged the single design into generational wealth. The employee who drafted the sketches did not. The corporate transaction was perfectly legal. The patent belonged to the forge. Champion De-Armament needed a name for the new tool. They looked at the interlocking design. The grooves were channels. The tongue locked them. They named it the Channellock Plier. The tool hit hardware store shelves in 1933. It cost slightly more than a standard slip-joint plier. Tradesmen bought it anyway. Plumbers bought too. A standard slip-joint plier sheared at the bolt. The Channellock Plier did not. It gripped harder. It adjusted faster. The jaw capacity was massive. A 9.5-inch Channellock Plier could easily grip a 1.5-inch galvanized pipe. Mechanics abandoned their old tools. They threw them in the scrap bin. Word spread across Pennsylvania job sites. Word spread across the Midwest. The Meadville Forge fired its furnaces hot. World War II accelerated production. The American military required millions of hand tools. Every Willys Jeep carried a tool roll. Every Willys Jeep carried a tool roll. Every Sherman tank required mechanical maintenance. Every B-17 bomber needed hydraulic lines tightened. The U.S. War Department issued massive contracts to Champion De-Armament. The factory ran multiple shifts. The drop hammers pounded high-carbon steel 24 hours a day. Millions of young American men deployed overseas. Millions of young American men deployed overseas. They were handed Channellock pliers by military quartermasters. They learned to wrench on heavy armor using the Meadville tool. The war ended. The men came home. The American housing boom began. From 1945 to 1955, developers built massive suburban tracts. Levittown rose in Pennsylvania. Entire grids of houses required modern indoor plumbing. They required miles of copper water lines. They required iron waste pipes. The plumbing trade expanded exponentially. The newly trained tradesmen bought their own tools. They bought the tool they trusted in the military. They demanded the Channellock. Champion De-Armament standardized their flagship design. They introduced the Model 420. It became the definitive standard of the American tradesman. The specifications were rigid. Overall length, 9.5 inches. Jaw capacity, 1.5 inches. Number of adjustments, 5. Weight, 13.8 ounces. Exactly 391 grams. The tool was drop forged from C1080 high-carbon steel. A raw steel billet entered a gas furnace. It heated to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal glowed yellow. A 2,000-pound drop hammer smashed the steel into a precision die. 3 heavy strikes. The molecular grain of the steel aligned. The internal structure compacted. The two halves were married. The teeth were milled at exactly 9-degree angles. They bit aggressively in both directions. Output in 1932, 0 tongue and groove pliers. In 1935, 20,000. By 1955, 2 million per year. The handles were bare steel. Bare steel is brutal on a winter job site. It freezes the hands. It slips when coated in cutting oil. In the 1950s, the company solved the grip problem. They heated the forged handles. They dipped the handles into liquid polyvinyl chloride. The plastisol bonded to the high-carbon steel. They chose a very specific color. It was a bright cyan blue. The exact hex code is number 005, A8B. The blue grip changed the trajectory of the company. It was highly visible. A plumbing foreman could look into a dark trench. He saw the blue handles in the mud. He knew the tool. He He knew it was a channel lock. The blue dip became a visual beacon on construction sites from New York to California. The channels lock the jaw. The jaw turns the pipe builds the city. The Model 420 was an absolute triumph. It retailed for $2.50. In today's money, that is $32. Tradesmen paid the premium. They refused to work without it. The Meadville plant expanded its footprint. The workforce grew to hundreds of local men. The DeArmond family rode the post-war economic wave to unprecedented heights. Then the timer ran out. The United States Patent Office grants utility patents for a strict term. A standard utility patents for a strict term. A standard utility patent lasts 17 years. Howard Manning filed the patent in 1932 too. The legal protection expired in 1949. The blueprint immediately entered the public domain. The moat evaporated, competitors swarmed. The American hardware market was dominated by massive tool conglomerates. Stanley Tools, Crescent, Utica, and Crater watched Champion DeArmond get rich on a single design. They waited patiently for the patent to expire. The day it did, they launched their own tongue and groove pliers. They bypassed the research and development phase entirely. They reverse-engineered the Model 420. They copied the exact channel dimensions. They copied the jaw angles. They copied the 5 adjustments. Hardware store shelves flooded with clones. Some competitors forged their pliers from cheap, low-grade steel. Some competitors bypassed the drop forge entirely and used cast iron. Cast iron is brittle. It shatters under heavy rotational load. The clones were inferior, but they were cheap. A generic knockoff cost half the price of a genuine Model 420. The knockoffs featured green handles. They featured red handles. They featured black handles. The market was completely saturated. Champion DeArmond faced a massive identity crisis. The original 1886 company name was suddenly a liability. A young plumber walked into a hardware store in Ohio. He walked up to the counter. He did not ask the clerk for a Champion. Did not ask the clerk for a Champion DeArmond Model 420 tongue and groove slip joint plier. He asked for a pair of channel locks. The hardware clerk turned around. He grabbed a cheap red-handled Utica knockoff from the shelf. He placed it on the counter. The plumber bought it. He thought he was buying the original tool. He did not know the difference. The original tool was stamped Champion DeArmond in large letters across the hinge. The word Channellock was stamped in much smaller letters. It was merely a product line. The corporation had spent 60 years building the Champion DeArmond brand name. They stamped it on Farrier tools. They stamped it on hammers. They stamped it on hammers. They stamped it on cold chisels. It was a proud family legacy. It represented 19th century Pennsylvania blacksmith. It meant absolutely nothing to the 1950s tradesman. The tradesman only cared about the channels and the lock. The name had become a generic noun. Mechanics called every tongue and groove plier a channel lock, regardless of who forged it. The brand was being hollowed out by its own success. The generic knockoffs were stealing the market share. They were destroying the reputation of the design. Cheap cast iron tongues snapped on the job site. Plumbers blamed the tool. The DeArmond family was bleeding sales. The 50-year-old name was failing them. They held board meetings in Meadville. They analyzed the falling numbers. The generic rivals were winning. The family faced a brutal business decision. They could keep the historic Champion DeArmond name and slowly lose the plier market. Or they could make a radical, unprecedented corporate move. They could kill their own heritage. In 1963, the board of directors met in Meadville. The vote was final. They filed the legal paperwork. They dissolved the Champion DeArmond Tool Company. They erased the legacy of George B. DeArmond. The 1886 name vanished from the factory walls. It vanished from the steel dies. The company reincorporated as Channellock Incorporated. It was a complete paradox. They killed their family name to save their family business. They surrendered the corporate identity to a single 1932 patent. The utility patent was gone. Anyone could manufacture the mechanical design. The word was not. The Dedarment family weaponized the English language. They registered the federal trademark for the word Channellock. They registered the trademark for the specific blue handle color. The hex code number 005. A8B became legally protected intellectual property. They hired aggressive corporate attorneys. They sent cease and desist letters to hardware stores across America. They targeted any competitor calling a generic tongue-and-groove plier a Channellock. The legal battles lasted for years. The company targeted Sears Roebuck. Sears sold generic pliers under the Craftsman brand. Store clerks verbally called them Channellocks. The Meadville attorneys sent legal orders to the largest retailer in the world. They won. Sears issued strict memos to their hardware departments. They retrained their sales staff. The vocabulary correction was mandatory. A clerk caught using the trademarked name for a generic tool faced termination. Channellock policed the market with absolute efficiency. Competitors attempted to bypass the trademark. They painted their handles blue. Channellock sued them. The blue grip belonged exclusively to Pennsylvania. A tradesman walking down a hardware aisle saw a wall of red and green handles. He saw one solid row of blue. He knew exactly what it was. The blue handle guaranteed drop, forged high-carbon steel. If a tool did not come from Meadville, it was just a generic plier. The legal distinction drew a hard line in the market. George B. Dearman sold his forged tools from a horse-drawn wagon in 1886. He guaranteed the steel with his own name. If a farrier tool broke, Dearman replaced it himself. His son stamped that name onto millions of tools. Erasing it was a calculated risk. It was a strict admission of market reality. The tradesman dictates the market. The tradesman did not care about the Dearman legacy. The tradesman only cared about the channels and the lock. The family accepted this. They swallowed their pride. They protected the factory. The 1980s brought the big box hardware era. Home Depot and Lowe's disseminated local hardware dealers. They demanded massive retail volume. They demanded lower wholesale prices. American tool companies faced crushing margin pressure. Utica moved production offshore. Crescent moved to China. Cryoder disappeared entirely. Gone. The American hand tool industry was hollowed out. Factories in Ohio and Connecticut locked their doors. Thousands of American manufacturing jobs vanished. The big box stores pushed Channellock to offshore their production. They wanted the Model 420 forged in Taiwan. An Asian forge could produce the tool for a fraction of the cost. It would increase the corporate profit margin by 40%. The Dedarment family refused. They kept the factory in Meadville. They kept the union workforce. They kept buying high-carbon steel from American mills. The decision cost them margin. It gained them total loyalty. The American tradesman noticed. A plumber drops a tool from a ladder. It hits the concrete. He drives to the hardware store to replace it. A generic cast iron knockoff imported from Taiwan costs $4. A genuine American forged Model 420 costs $15. The price gap is massive. It does not matter. Plumbers destroy cheap tools. A shattered jaw on a job site costs hours of labor. Labor costs money. Tradesmen buy the tool that does not shatter. He turns the new tool over. He looks for the stamp. He looks for Made in USA. He finds it stamped deep into the blue-handled plier. He buys it. The modern manufacturing process remains anchored in 19th century blacksmithing principles. It is scaled by 21st century robotics. A raw steel rods by rail from an American steel mill. It is cut into precise 10-inch billets. The billet enters a rapid induction heater. It reaches 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in exactly 7 seconds. A robotic arm transfers the glowing yellow steel to the drop forge die. The 2,000-pound hammer drops. The floor shakes. The excess steel flashes out the side of the die. A mechanical trim press shears the flash away. The two halves enter a massive annealing furnace. They cool very slowly over 12 hours. This softens the high-carbon steel for precise machining. A broaching machine cuts the parallel tongue and grooves. A separate milling machine cuts the jaw teeth. The teeth must be perfectly sharp. They must sit at exact 90-degree angles. They must bite aggressively into a round steel pipe without slipping. The tool is hand-assembled. A hydraulic press permanently rivets the pivot bolt. The assembled tool requires localized heat treatment. It undergoes electronic induction hardening. An electric coil heats only the jaws and the milled teeth. They are immediately quenched. The teeth harden to Rockwell C55. The handles remain deliberately softer. Hard handles shatter under pressure. Soft handles bend. The tradesman needs the tool to bend before it breaks. The final step is the liquid plastisol dip. A rack of bare steel handles lowers into a heated vat of Channellock blue. They bake in a curing oven. They are packaged and shipped. Channellock ships 6 million pairs of pliers per year. The factory has never left Meadville, Pennsylvania. The facility covers 260,000 square feet. It houses dozens of massive gravity drop hammers. The company consumes 4,000 tons of high-carbon steel annually. That is 8 million pounds of raw American steel converted into hand tools every 12 months. The workforce numbers over 350 local employees. The DeArmond family still owns the company. The fifth generation walks the factory floor today. The workforce includes third-generation hammer operators. A father retires, his son takes over the drop forge. The institutional knowledge of heat treating and steel grain structure stays strictly inside the Meadville city limits. They expanded the product line. They forge heavy lineman's pliers. They forge precision diagonal cutters. They forge aviation snips. The Model 420 remains the undisputed flagship. It is not fundamentally changed since Howard Manning finalized the blueprint in 1932. It features the same 5 adjustments. It features the same 9.5-inch length. It utilizes the identical tongue and groove mechanism. It retails today for $22. The original slip joint plier is obsolete. The tongue and groove design replaced it entirely in the plumbing trade. The mechanical failure of the trapped pivot bolt is a forgotten memory. Howard Manning solved a fatal flaw of leverage. The corporation took ownership of his solution. 50 years of 19th century blacksmith history was purposefully destroyed in 1963. Every other American tool company kept their original names and moved their factories to China. Channellock gave up its name and stayed in Pennsylvania. If you found this documentary valuable, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.